Abdul, you have an idea of the number of people that are present?
Now we have 8 people, including yourself, myself, and Abdul.
Okay. Then okay, Abdul, you had a bit of the echo, but you're okay now. What were you saying? 9. Okay. So we should wait maybe until 5 after, you think?
Yeah, let me log out. I'm logging as myself. This is Omar. I'm logged in as Abdul.
Okay, I see. Marhab. كيف حالك عمر؟ Did everybody see the performance of a thing, Mo, at the Olympics? I was very excited about her performance in the 800 meters. She's
Which one?
her name is Athing Mo.
Oh yeah. Oh yes.
Remember her?
Oh,
yeah.
Absolutely. Oh yes.
She made me so proud. I watched all of her. I went back and looked at all of her, even some of her high school races on YouTube. She's quite amazing.
It is. She is.
Mm-hmm. So, Asari, the time today is 2 hours or an hour and a half?
The choice is yours.
Okay. I don't know what to say. I think it depends. If there's just going to be 9 people or less than a dozen people, you should keep it to an hour and a half for sure. If people start to show up, we'll let's check in about after 50 minutes or so.
Okay.
Okay.
Sure.
Yeah. So if we start 5 minutes, say about 11 o'clock, we can just check in and see how it's going.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yes.
Everybody?
Feel free to send me, a private message in the chat.
Oh, okay.
Oh, this is from Fatma Al-Mahdi. She said some people are watching in YouTube also.
Oh, that's right. That's right. We have to keep that in mind. Yeah. Marhaban, everybody watching, wherever you are. Okay, Sheikh Khalid is here. Maybe we should begin. ازيك يا خالد؟
كيف الحال دكتور عبد الله؟ السلام عليكم.
الله يبارك فيك يا أخي.
الله يسلمك.
كيفك يا دكتور خالد؟
Recording in progress.
كيف الأحوال سهري؟
الحمد لله.
إن شاء الله كويسين كلكم؟
على أحسن حال الحمد لله. إن شاء الله.
الحمد
الحمد لله الحمد لله. كيف الأخبار؟
الحمد لله على أحسن حال.
Sorry, we'll begin with Laylatul Qadr, or
أوكي. نبدأ بإن أنزلناه. ونقرأ. عبد الله يقرأ إن أنزلناه.
Oh, okay. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ألا ننزلناه في ليلة القدر وما أدراك ما ليلة القدر. ليلة القدر خير من 1000 شهر. تنزل الملائكة والروح فيها بإذن ربهم من كل أمر. سلام هي حتى مطلع الفجر. صدق الله العظيم. So I'm going to start this second chapter of this presentation that I've entitled Blacklight, Reflecting at the Confluence of the Three Niles, where I had the pleasure and honor of discovering Ustaz Mahmoud and his new understanding of the Quran and of Islam and of Sunnah and of Deen in the largest sense of the word. And since that time in 1977, I have been a disciple of Ustaz Mahmoud's understanding of Islam. And today I'm hoping to continue on the presentation that we did last month, the first chapter. And in that chapter, I talked a lot about my background, becoming a Muslim. And we got the same issue again of frozen screen. Okay, just a moment. Got to. It's the same issue, so I need to open it again, it looks like. Can people see it? No.
Not yet.
Not yet, okay.
If you have a problem, Abdullah, you can send the presentation to Omar, and he can help him. Omar can.
It's just, it's not the same process that we followed last time. So just a second.
Yeah, I think you should stop the share and then open the PowerPoint first, and then do the share and select PowerPoint.
Okay. Okay.
You see it now. Yep.
You see it now?
Yep.
Okay. Great. Okay. So this presentation is divided into 4 parts, and we're on chapter 2 of it. And it started the same way as chapter 1 with a little confusion. In chapter 1, I talked about, really the idea of becoming a Muslim, what led me to Islam. And I really consider myself to have become a Muslim when I encountered Fikr Jamhuriyah, even though I embraced Islam originally in 1975. I would consider that really a phase of being a mu'min, a believer. I believe that there was a clearer understanding of Deen than I was encountering. And I understood that Islam was revealed after Christianity, having grown up a Christian. And so I started to believe in the Quran and in that message, that revelation that was brought by the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And once I arrived in Sudan and encountered the second message of Islam, it further convinced me of the idea that Islam is the culmination of the religious experience, or the culmination of revelation from our Creator to humanity. It convinced me of that, with the notion that what makes the Quran applicable to the present time is the fact that it has distinct levels. And one of the levels, which we can think of as the first message of Islam, was perfectly suitable for the 7th century. And anyone who studied history understands the tremendous difference between human beings, their societies, their technology, their governmental systems, their economic practices between the 20th, 21st, and the 7th century. And so the idea that there was within the Quran that there's two messages, one suitable for that time and one suitable for human beings as they reach a point of development, right, makes a lot of sense. You know, and Ustaz talked about it as the idea between the 7th century and the 21st century is like having a 7-year-old child and having a perfect outfit for that child. And now that child is 21 years old and you want to force the child into that same outfit. It's not rational. There's nothing wrong with the outfit, but there's something wrong with the idea of trying to force the child into the outfit. And so with that, embracing this idea, I stayed in Sudan from 1977 until 1986. And so this presentation really is to speak about the next, what I would call the next phase while I was in the Sudan. Before I go into it, or at my introduction to it really, is that between my last presentation and now, I had the pleasure of speaking at the wedding of Abdul Halim and Keaton in Iowa City. And I was invited there by Abdul Halim, who is a dear brother. And I just happened to be going to Iowa City anyway on a different date. So I just changed my ticket and was able to arrive at the wedding. And when I got there, I understood clearly that I was supposed to be the wakil for Keaton. And I had talked to him a couple of times on the phone, and I found him to be an exceptional young man. And Abdul Halim has come to the same conclusion. And I was able to part of this wedding, to say a few words to the Sudanese community that was there and to my brothers and sisters from the New Islamic Mission that were there. And it was an honor. And I had a chance while I was there to speak to the community about the importance of the African American community and the Sudanese community in Iowa coming together, and also the importance of Ustaz's idea that the traditional Sudanese wedding needs to move into the current era in a manner that's closer to the original intent of marriage. And he talks about this, the khatwa, the form of marriage that the Republicans endorse as being a transitional stage from the traditional marriage to an Islamic marriage. And it really focuses on holy matrimony. It does away with all of the excessive expenses, and it gets down to what is at the core of the marriage, you know, the relationship between the two loved ones and the relationships between their families and the dignity that marriage brings to human beings. as it establishes community. While I was there, I had a distinct pleasure of visiting the brothers and sisters who have passed on, the Berzakiin, in Iowa City. So we traveled, this is the lower left corner, to the graveyard and visited our brothers and sisters that are buried there. And Mama Nawal, you can see her in the center in her tobe, spoke to us several times. And part of her message was her sharing her experience being with Ustaz Mahmoud when visiting the dearly departed in Sudan. And she talked about Ustaz's discussion of appropriate manners when you visit the graveyard. And everybody was gathered around and mesmerized by her talk. I had never heard this before. But she talked about how when you visit, understand that those dearly departed are present and they are pleased by your visit, and that you should give them your full attention while you're there. And you should not engage in idle talk, but have your attention on your visitation to the specific people who are interred in the graveyard. And she talked more about it. And then towards the end, she said, and before you leave, you should attend to the gravesite of the person or one of the persons that you visited. And you should depart from them in a respectful manner. And that should be the last thing you do before you leave the cemetery. And one of the things on reflecting on that was, again, the comprehensive nature of Ustaz's understanding of Islam. When you start talking about adab al-Berzakiin, the manners appropriate for visiting the dearly departed in a cemetery. And one has to wonder sometimes, how does Ustaz know knows? That's the question that often comes to my mind. Because he speaks about it with a clear knowledge, and it rings as being obviously true that we should be respectful, obviously true that we shouldn't be distracted, having unnecessary conversations, obviously true that we should leave, right? We should attend to them for our purpose for being there, and we should leave in a respectful manner, saying our goodbye to the person or persons that we visited. That just rings as being obvious truth. Yet it also is a deep insight into the nature of existence. And this is the nature of Ustaz Mahmoud's thinking. If you think deeply about it, you have to often ask yourself, how does he know that? I found myself doing that often. I would take Ustaz information that I would receive from different sources, and I was thinking, well, he might not have heard this. And almost every time I did that, he said to me, Arifta, I knew this. I'm aware of that. And at some point, I had to ask myself, how could he be aware of what I just shared with him, which came from such a specific source about such a specific matter, that only that source was actually present when it was discussed? How could he be aware of that? So I just wanted to open with that frame. And then I also had the opportunity to visit the African American Museum in DC, and also spend time with my brother Ashari Balul while I was there, and it was all precious time. Weddings themselves are something that are joyous, and you can see in the upper right corner the joy present at this particular wedding. And I believe it was the same wedding that you find in the upper left-hand corner of Ustaz's niece. And you can see the joy in the people that are surrounding Ustaz, emanating from them. Fadl, Ustaz Saeed, and I don't know this gentleman's name. Somebody can help me with that. Often in the lower left, I'll have my camera. We would sing in Shad at the wedding, and this happened also at the wedding in Iowa City. And brothers are in attendance, brothers and sisters in attendance and focused and experiencing in the joy. So it was certainly one of the most delightful experiences I had while in the Sudan, was attending these weddings. I really never had the opportunity to attend a traditional Sudanese wedding. I intended to do it, but the opportunity never presented itself in the 9 years I was there. And that was just an issue of, I could say Wajib Mubashir, but I wasn't always focusing on my duties. Sometimes it was just I was distracted by other things. Ustaz Mahmoud, and here is Ustaz leading a procession of sisters and brothers visiting the dearly departed. And maybe it was on an occasion like this that he spoke to a select group of them about this adab, because it's not something I generally heard him talk about, but it might be written somewhere and I just haven't discovered it. My experience with Ustaz when he walked was that he walked very quickly towards his destination with a clear intent, right? And that aspect reminded me of what I read about the Holy Prophet Muhammad and the way he moved and the way he walked and the way he walked at an accelerated pace directly towards his destination. I found that with Ustaz Mahmoud also. And the thing I wanted to point out here is that the teacher was always teaching. Whether it's in his home and he's instructing people in things that he wants done in a particular way, whether it's in Jalsa, where he's editing a book that's being written by another brother, whether he's in the graveyard and he's teaching proper etiquette for visiting the dearly departed, whether it's in a Jalsa in his home where people like Ahmed Dali are reporting back on their experiences doing their rukun, their discussion, their free platform discussion corner. Ustaz Mahmoud is always receiving, critiquing, and engineering the movement that he took full responsibility for. Kind of at the center of the movement was Allah and Tariq Muhammad. But Ustaz was directing us to focus on that center and to stay focused on that center. And that had to do with, ibadah and mamala, our worship, and also the way in which we interacted with people throughout the day. So he was an engineer, and he was a masterful engineer of our movement in the Sudan. I spoke a little bit in chapter 1 about how Ustaz's style of teaching followed the Socratic method, in that he had people express their ideas after a jalsa, after a nadawa, after a unique experience, after visiting an exhibition, going on what we call the wolf. Whatever was the experience, he would want people to discuss it. And most of those discussions were in public. And this is the Socratic method. And Ustaz would allow people to benefit from him engineering that discussion in a way. And I shared an example in chapter 1 of that. But that method was one that helped to cultivate the sisters and the brothers in our movement to give them the knowledge, the confidence, the character, and the fortitude to carry his message into the streets, which our sisters often did. And sometimes those streets could be hostile. His work with the sisters was something that attracted me to the movement. And he's known to have said, when someone asked him, I don't have time to read your books, Mahmoud, just tell me what it is that you're trying to say. And he said, Shuguli Benati. My work is my daughters. My work is my daughters. That's the essence of it. And the daughters, as I said in chapter 1, lived in the house of Ustaz Mahmoud. When I was in Iowa, I found that the sisters that three sisters shared the same story with me just recently while I was in Iowa. And that story was they were attracted to Ustaz Mahmoud as a human being before they understood Republican ideology. And I don't know if that's true of all the sisters, but it was true of the three that shared their stories with me while I was in Iowa City. And that's true of me as well. I was attracted to the human being before I knew the content of his ideas. And these sisters not only lived in his house, they prayed the night prayer, not only in his house, right, but in the saloon and in his room. They had the opportunity to pray the night vigil, right, with Ustaz in close proximity, and also, again, him engaging them in conversation about their prayer. Something amazing that I'm not sure brothers had at the same level. Shuguli Benati. Aspects of our meeting were like the Nadawa, and of course our sisters, Batul, Asma, and many other sisters led these discussions at the universities, at colleges, at clubs around the three cities, Khartoum North, and Umdurman, but also around the country. And here we have Dali in the center. I was able to attend many of his lectures because I was working at the University of Khartoum, and he was the primary speaker at the University of Khartoum. This Nadawa also was a place where ideas were being shared in public, were being discussed in public, and it was a place where people could hear our ideas. They could many times encounter them in writing. They could feel our commitment to what we were doing through our music, through our chanting, and always there would be debriefing with Ustaz Mahmoud, questions asked, direction given. These Nadawas many times, like this one at Cairo University, again, directed by sisters, would have an exhibit with them. And so we would have our books on distribution, on display, I mean, and there would also be posters like this one about the return of Christ, which would engage the students intellectually. There would be inshad or hymns, which would engage them, their hearts and their minds as well. And then there would be a real intellectual discussion about topics that the students really gravitated to. University and college students were very interested in what we had to say. And that proved that interest tended to increase over time. I particularly was also fascinated by concepts like the return of Christ. being a person who was previously a Christian, I found it to be very gratifying for Ustaz Mahmoud to have a discourse on Jesus Christ, one that I'd never encountered as a Christian. Islam itself has a discourse on Jesus that is found in the Quran, but not in the Bible. And that's Jesus when he's an infant and his mother brings him home to the family. And this notion of the return of Christ is something that I found very thought-provoking, as did the students who were in this movement. Excuse me a second. We also had these free platforms on the street, and upper left corner, Stas honored me with the ability to go out and speak about our ideas, even though I was a little bit half-baked. There were a lot of things I didn't know. And there were some things I did know, and some things that brought me to the Sudan looking for answers to specific questions. But he honored me and encouraged me to go out and to encounter English-speaking people in the market and engage them in ideas that we had in books that were translated into English. And I did that, and I relished it. And I often found very interesting conversations with people. I remember once I had a conversation with an Italian American in Khartoum Market, and he was Catholic. And he was very mesmerized by the notion of Islam as a continuation of Judaism and Christianity, of the three equalities that Ustaz Mahmoud talks about that are necessary for forming a society so that people can practice religion and not just preach it and enhance their morality. He was really interested in that idea. And then he caught himself. He said, but I'm Catholic. And he said, as much money as I've given to the Catholic Church over the course of my life, if they're not right, I don't want to know what's right. And then he kind of just walked away. I shared that with Ustaz, and Ustaz said, he said that? I said, yeah. And we both kind of chuckled. Sisters out, engaging the public. And this engagement had a particular nature. And when I first arrived in the 70s, there was more opposition to Sudanese women being out discussing religion in the street, which was culturally not acceptable. And there was opposition from young men who would be telling them, if I was your brother, force you to go home, that type of thing. By the early 80s, that had kind of changed. If people didn't want to hear what was being said, then other people in the crowd, not our brothers, but other young men in the crowd would say, look, buddy, you're not, I'm interested in this. If you're not interested in it, move along, go somewhere else. So we saw that change, and we saw that gravitation. Here's another discussion of sisters in the market. So this was an aspect of our movement that was new. It was really kind of revolutionary to have women discussing various topics, particularly religion, in the streets of a devoutly Muslim country, right? Like Sudan. But that is what our sisters were prepared to do and did in a manner that was exemplary. Stas once sent me on a wolf to southern Sudan, and it was a fascinating experience for me. Because he was sending me, I felt no fear and I had no problem going. I never really thought about it, but this was like in late 81, 82, early 82. And so there was some opposition between the North and the South at that time. And I remember when Stas sent us off, he gave me a lot of encouragement that I was going to be all right when I was in southern Sudan. And it turned out that that was the case. While I was speaking to a group similar to this group, this is a picture I got offline. It's a little larger, and it was like a half circle. And I was speaking to them about Ustas's ideas about the federation, where the Southern Sudan governed itself because of its uniqueness, and where Islam is not imposed on anyone, and Christians and Muslims have equal rights before the law, all these things that were very interesting to them. Some seniors came out, upperclassmen came out and just popped their fingers and everything stopped. And they asked me who I was, and I had to identify myself. And eventually I was able to identify myself successfully by letting them know that I was an African-American. And when they heard that, they said, continue, and they just walked away. And so that type of opposition was something that could have gone a different way, but it went just as Ustaz had predicted it would go. They were very accepting of me in Southern Sudan, and I was honored to be able to go to, this was Juba University, and hold a platform there under the direction and engineering of Ustaz Mahmoud. Part of our daily practice was in Shad, spiritual hymns. And these hymns were sung by men and women, girls and women, boys and men in our families. And in the lower right-hand corner is Nejla Yusuf Lutfi. She's the mother of the bride, An, that I was telling you about in that initial slide when I went to Iowa City. This is the mother of the bride in the lower left, and she's singing here. I just want you to listen to this. This is 1977, the year I arrived in the Sudan, and give you an idea of how moving it was to hear in Shad, even though many times I had to ask for translations later of what was being said. I had no idea what was being said. But here's a little taste of it for you.
قالوا حكمته شرعت أمته قالوا حكمته شرعت أمته قالوا حكمته شرعت أمته قالوا حكمته شرعت أمته فعل سنته فعل مطلبي أحمد النبي أحمد النبي باب المجتبي أحمد النبي باب المجتبي أحمد النبي باب المجتبي طبع منفطم أمره فاستغم طبع منفطم أمره فاستغم طبع منفطم أمره فاستغم طبع منفطم أمره فاستغم الباد الختم حبه مشربي أحمد النبي أحمد النبي باب المجتبي أحمد النبي باب المجتبي طبع منفطم أمره فاستغم طبع منفطم أمره فاستغم طبع منفطم أمره فاستغم طبع منفطم أمره فاستغم الباد الختم حبه مشربي أحمد النبي أحمد النبي باب المجتبي أحمد النبي باب المجتبي عاش بما كفى وانفق ما عفا 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 أصلع عفا لحلم النبي أحمد النبي باب المجتبي عاش بما كفى وانفق ما عفا 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 كم أصلع عفا بحلم النبي أحمد النبي باب المجتبي أحمد النبي باب المجتبي يا خير الكلم لأعظم اسم يا خير الكلم لأعظم اسم يا خير الكلم لأعظم اسم يا خير الكريم لأعظم اسم داعي بعلم لحال النبي أحمد النبي أحمد النبي باب المجتبي أحمد النبي باب المجتبي أحمد النبي باب المجتبي
So that was part of our daily practice, had in Shad regularly, if not daily, in every aspect. And it allowed us to keep our mind on, as an example there, on the path of the Holy Prophet Ahmed. And it reinforced some of the ideas that Ustaz Mahmoud had of helping us understand the difference between Ahmed and Muhammad, between the Prophet and the Messenger, peace be upon him. And it filled our day with not only joy, but with stimulation to our heart and our mind, keeping us focused on the path of the Prophet. Bab al-Bayt, the Holy Prophet Muhammad. Also during while I was in Sudan, by 1980, I had been there 3 years and decided to go home. I had to really negotiate with the University of Khartoum at that time to get home because I was on a local contract and not an expatriate contract. And so my contract does not include them paying for my trip home. But I made the argument that I used to train some of these expatriates that came into our office, and I had been there for a while, and they finally conceded and paid for my ticket home, which I so appreciated. On the way back to the States, I went to Egypt. I met up with Ahmed Jan. We had actually spent time together in Kasla. Brother was very important and helpful to me in just understanding Fikra and just as a brother. And this is us. We visited Cairo Museum. We visited the pyramids. We went inside the pyramids, not the Great Pyramid, but the one just next to it, right up to the sarcophagus inside. And fascinating experience. I remember when we were on horseback, the Egyptian guide understood us to be Sudanese. He assumed I was Sudanese as well. And we couldn't really ride horses. And he was just shocked because in his mind, the Sudanese were the best horsemen in the world. They could ride horses standing up and this type of thing. You know, they had these ideas that, you know, all of the Sudanese were like the Sudanese, the Bagara in Western Sudan, who can ride horses standing on their back, some of them, right? But he assumed all Sudanese were like that. So I got home, spent time with my parents and with my mother's mother. She, of course, was the one who sent me off to Sudan in 1977 on my mission, as she called it. When she spoke to her bishop, she said, my grandson's on a mission in Africa. That's how she saw it. And it was really good to spend some time in Seattle with my parents, especially with my mother, because she had premonitions that something bad was going to happen in Sudan. And as I said before, her premonitions were not wrong. But in 1980, there was no sight of them. Things were beautiful and so forth. So Ahmed and I spent time in Kasla. I also used to visit Sayyid Hassan in Kasla, lower right-hand corner. And this is the tomb of Sayyid al-Hassan. And I developed a particular relationship with him, where I used to go to Kasla so often. Some of the brothers asked me, why are you know, the Stas is like 1 block away from where you're staying and you're running off to Kasla. What's going on? So I had to explain to them I had this relationship with Sayyid al-Hassan that I was cultivating. And I used to, during Ramadan, a couple of times I went and I fasted in his mausoleum. And one experience I had was I had bought a new clay ibrik, which is a water pot that you use to make ablution before you pray. I had bought it from Abdul Rahim Halawi's father. And I took it with me that day when I was fasting, and I thought I would anoint it by putting it down into the trough where people got water for their drinking. And they just were alarmed. They were calling me all kinds of crazy when I did that. And then I told them that it was a Nui brick and that it was pristine. And then they accepted it. And I sat down with them and spent the day there until Maghrib. So I used to spend time with Sayyid al-Hasan, and I love going to Kasla for that and to visit with the brothers and sisters there. Hilawi used to just treat me so well when I would come there. Just an enjoyable place to be, as well as the sisters. Okay. I started teaching as soon as I got to Sudan. So 1977, I was at Aliyah, right walking distance from where I was living in Thawra. And these are some of my students from the school. And this was the head teacher in the English department. I was teaching English literature to seniors who were preparing for their proficiency exam. And the students were really engaging. They were more engaging with me outside of the classroom when they found out I played basketball and that type of thing. They wanted me to play basketball and talk. And they wanted to show me how good they were at soccer. And so we had those little competitions. The staff also, I had a good relationship with the staff. And I've got some stories to tell about Lahliya if you're interested. But my experiences there are extremely positive. And it was very surprising to me that after a year, I was unceremoniously transferred to another school. And I'm sure that had something to do with them discovering that I was a disciple of Ustaz Mahmoud. I did have an experience with Hassan Tarabi. One of his nephews went to this school. Anybody's interested in that, you can ask me about it. I've told that story several times. But this was my first teaching experience in the Sudan, and it was fabulous. By 1978, Dr. Abdullah and Naim, who's a professor of law at Emory University right now, he was a professor of law at the University of Khartoum at the time, told me there was an opening in English, scientific English. In my imagination, because at the time I had a bachelor's degree, my imagination was that I should be able to teach English in high school, high secondary school in the Sudan, but I had not thought about teaching English at the university level. It was outside of my imagination. But luckily, I had some experience teaching at the University of Hawaii. And this gave me the confidence to go and apply for the job. And I applied and I got the job. And these are some of my colleagues. And they were from all over the country that England colonized, right? So you had, he's Scottish and she's American, Sudanese. The rest are English here. In this lower left-hand corner, he's South African. She's Australian. Again, three of them are English. And then Khidr, I talked about Khidr last time. That's a picture of him. He and I had a really great relationship. He was, we called him our Gafir. He was a custodian for our program. And Sudani Tamam. That's Khidr. Let's see. I learned a lot from the English. One of the things that struck me was they're easier to work with than Americans for the most part. I won't say white Americans, but Americans. They just tend to be more professional when they work, and they're able to dichotomize things like that. And so I found the experience of working with them wonderful. They're polite and cordial when they interact. For the most part, there are exceptions, of course. And I just found it very easy to work with them in that department. However, very early on, it was time for the final grades, and we had a meeting, and it was decided that too many students had passed. And I said, based on what? They said, well, we're just based on our count. And I said, and why is that a problem? Oh, well, we have to be taken seriously. if too many students pass, then if it's so easy to pass our courses, why are we needed? And I'm saying, yeah, but you've already told the students that you have a certain grade that they must attain. You cannot now raise the grade after they've submitted their final test scores. And they listened to me argue with them for I don't know how long. And finally, they just said, well, you know, Abdullah, we see you have a point and we're going to move on. And they had already decided, and they stuck with that policy. And students that thought they were passing, say, at a score of 70 now found that the score was 75, and some of them failed. And so I was really, I have to say, appalled by that behavior. I found it to be unethical, immoral, and it made me very uncomfortable. But that was kind of the nature of how the British kind of worked, right? On the surface, very professional, very polite and so forth. But behind the scenes, there was another, I would say, ideology operating. And it sometimes was, I would say, unethical and uncomfortable. But my experience in that department, I have to say, was a blessing. I was able to work on my master's degree. The University of Khartoum paid for it because I was teaching for them. And my interactions with almost all of these folks was really positive. At the same time, I entered into graduate school in the Institute of African and Asian Studies. And these are some of my colleagues. I think her name was Samira from Somalia. She actually was raised in Europe, Belgium, I believe, and Khadija and Jamila. And I've told a story about these two really questioning me why I got involved in a cult. I came to Sudan and got involved in a cult. And I helped them understand again that there's none of the attributes of a cult that you find in Ustaz Mahmoud's movement. He's not asking us for anything, to give him anything. He's not asking us to believe in him and to follow him. He's directing us towards Tariq Muhammad and saying that is the solution to our problems, and understanding of differentiating the personal practice of the Holy Prophet Muhammad from those things that he did and said that were related to the time in which he lived, which would be Sharia or Islamic law. He directed us towards that differentiation and trying to improve ourselves as human beings through applying ourselves to our worship and our ma'amala, our interactions with people based on the example of the Holy Prophet Muhammad. That was what Ustaz Mahmoud was doing. And so none of the attributes of a cult leader who says, you know, do this for me and so forth. He was selfless in that regard. So I was able to convince them. This was one of my professors from the Institute of African and Asian Studies. He's the one who got me involved and interested in my master's topic. So my master's thesis was on a comparison of a colonial model of language classification of Sudanese languages to a more modern model developed by a professor from Stanford University named Joseph Greenberg. And this professor was the one who led me to be interested in that question. He presented them as just two options, and I wanted to know which one was preferable. And so I did the research and discovered that Greenberg's was much more scientifically based, and the British colonial model was expedient. They were classifying languages together that weren't even related to each other because it suited their administrative purposes. And so it was a very fascinating opportunity and a great blessing to be able to work on my master's degree part-time while I was teaching full-time at the University of Khartoum. Some of my colleagues at the university, expatriate Brits, Jamal, who actually joined the Jamhuriyeen. He was from Eritrea. Philip, who's still a close friend of mine, He's a professor in Big Rapids, Michigan at Ferris State. This is me kind of trying to look Sudanese. And this is Fozia and Hisham, who were my colleagues inside of the English language servicing unit. And I had many wonderful experiences with these colleagues and with these expatriates that were associated with the University of Khartoum. Phil was a Fulbright scholar. He taught English, and we spent a lot of time together, and we're still close. He, like myself, has one daughter, and he's still teaching as I am. So that was part of my activity. Can talk more about it. Also taught at the College of Education at the same time. So I was teaching part-time at the College of Education and full-time at University of Khartoum. These are some of my students from the College of Education. Delightful students. I really enjoyed teaching in different places, and students were, in the College of Education, I was teaching a slightly different curriculum to students, and I enjoyed that. I wasn't always teaching the same thing. And I enjoyed the students and they enjoyed me. It was just a pleasure. Some of I had taught a little bit in the States before I came to Sudan. As I was saying, at University of Hawaii, I had an opportunity to teach in a new program that was on campus when I was an undergraduate. And Sunni students are special. I mean, both in the quality and also in their manners and the way in which they interact with their teachers. So it's just a real pleasure to teach them. There might be an exception to that, a deception to everything, but just a pleasure teaching these students. And so I taught at the College of Education. I tried to stay busy. These are more shots of students from the University of Khartoum. I think I'm in a couple of them. Here I am here with this group, and there I am with that group. And, I had my camera with me, and I would find an opportunity to take shots of my different classes just to record the memory. And I was doing that anyway for the movement. I had decided that not enough record was being kept of what was going on from my perspective. And so I decided, visual record anyway. There was a lot of recordings going on and that type of thing, but visual record I didn't see as much of. And so I decided to engage myself in doing that. And this was kind of an extension of it. I started recording my students, and I continued to do that right through present. Because of COVID, we weren't on campus, but as late as 2019, I'm still taking shots of my students at Shoreline Community College here in Sudan. And I did the same thing at University of Washington. All right. More shots of students at the university. And students from all over the place. And the experience teaching them was fabulous. One experience I had that I'll share is that this was in this time period I'm talking about. So in the early 80s, I was giving instructions in a lecture hall. There were a lot of students present. I don't remember the number, but I think at one time I had like 70 students or something. So I don't know how many were in there, but it was a large group, and I was instructing them on this exercise, and one of the students wasn't paying attention. And as soon as I finished a fairly long instruction, she asked me for the same information. How do we do this? And my initial reaction probably would have been, if I was back in the States, to ask her to pay attention. But what I did was I just explained it to her again as if I hadn't just explained it. And when I finished doing that, the students applauded. I said, what are you applauding about? They said, that was Sudanese. How you handled that was Sudanese. And I said, oh, okay, maybe I am learning something. So I remember that experience. It stuck with me. More students at ELSU. The students in the upper right-hand corner are both Egyptian, and the students on the left side of me up here are from Shimalia. One of them was Mahas. I can't remember which one. And then those elegant young ladies down on the right and the left here. And then the bell bottoms, bell bottoms and afros was what was going on in 1980 in Sudan. And so everybody was wearing them, me and the students. And usually my style of dress was similar to, the other professors and the students that I saw there, is that, shirt tail out of your pants, sleeves rolled up to the elbow, shirt pressed. And that was kind of the style that I adopted, which was quite Sudanese. I think our time is good here. I'm going to be pulling this to a close, so there'll be time for some. But another aspect of our daily movement was not our daily movement, but one of the things that we did regularly was attend the Eid prayer at a local mosque. And it was walking distance from our houses. And so we would move from our different houses and we would congregate there and we would pray with everybody else in the mosque. And after our prayer, we would get together and have a zikr circle with our munshadeen in the center. And then people would often gather around us and listen to us as we zikred. And the munshadeen here in the center, I would be with them if I wasn't taking the picture. And this went on for years without incident, I would say, in the first couple of years. But by the early 80s, we started experiencing some negative experiences after or during our zikr at the mosque. And this is when the opposition to the movement started to increase. This opposition was felt, I would say, definitely even as early as 1979. We were feeling some opposition, but it really kind of increased in the early 80s. And in fact, we were attacked one day while we were in zikr by a mob of young men who were certainly led by Muslim brothers, and they might have all been Muslim brothers from what I know, and that physically attacked by them after Eid prayer in front of a mosque while we were chanting the name of God. They attacked us. And so, yeah, I took issue with that, and I wasn't as peaceful as they imagined, because I read them as being cowardly, because they know that our community is nonviolent. And so the idea that you would come and physically attack nonviolent people, it was too much of the behavior of a bully. And I really hate bullies. And so something in me just triggered, and I was not nonviolent. Astaghfirullah. So also experiences like that while I was teaching at Lahliya. And that was in 1977, 78. There was a procession. It was a small riot led by Muslim Brotherhood. It was the same day that they had burned down a gas station in Umdurman near Sodra. It might have been in Sodra or near Sodra. And then they were going around to all of the high secondary schools to demand that the students come out and join them in a protest. I don't even remember what the protest was for. But the issue that happened that day was some of the students from our school had joined them. And they were going around classroom to classroom. When they came to my classroom, I asked my students if you wanted to join them. And none of them wanted to join. And so I said, well, you don't have to. If you don't want to, don't. And we'll just continue to have class. So I was having class and they came banging on the door. Let those students out, that type of thing. And so I went outside and I said to them, I'm not keeping them. They want to stay. I mean, you can ask them. Let them out. I said, they want to stay. why don't you go on? They don't want to come. And so I went to go back into the classroom. And when I went back into the classroom, I was attacked by one of them from behind. But in typical cowardly way that they can behave, he hit me and ran, right? And so which was really a blessing for everybody, because no telling what would have happened. And there were at least 300 of them by that time out there. So it would have been not a good time to engage in violence. But that happened. And so there was opposition, as I'm saying, even in the 70s towards our movement, but that opposition grew in the 80s. At the same time, our support in the community was growing in the 80s. And so there was sort of this back and forth between those two realities. So I want to close with this slide. And this was another part of our practice, and called the Wada. And we would send people off many times, chanting Allah, and we would many times receive them in the same way. And this has just become a practice of mine. When people visit me at my home here, I walk out to the street and say goodbye to them with my hand raised until they go out of sight. And sometimes it confuses them because they stop and they say, did I forget something? I say, oh no, I'm just saying goodbye. Well, oh, okay. And they drive off. But this notion of wada was something that we did, and it's a deep type of practice, you know. It's a kind of it's a way of sending your blessings with people when they depart, and it's a very good practice, I think, to have, and it's something that we practiced regularly. And I was telling you, when I went to South Sudan, Ustaz got up early in the morning with me and two other brothers, Muhammad Ali Malik and Ustaz Abdullah. And my brother Muhammad and Ustaz Abdullah were going to travel to the airport with me. And so the four of us were waiting for Khairi, one of the brothers who was married and had a car, to come pick me up and take us to the airport. And he was a little bit late for some reason. And so Ustaz, we were out by the tree outside of his house after standing for maybe about over 10 minutes. He just squatted down. And so the three of us squatted with him, and we were just like these four corners kind of looking at each other. And that's when Ustaz said that, he said, Abdullah Ernest, lo gaita leo fi wata, a junub hajibu. If Abdullah goes to Sudan and just lies on the ground, he's going to attract the Southerners. That's what he said. And when he said it, because this is his hour, right? It's like 3, 4 in the morning. There's light coming out of his eyes in a way that you don't usually see light coming out of people's eyes. Sometimes you see it, but this is just flashing. His eyes are just flashing. And I remember when we got into the car, Abdul Latif is still smiling. You know, Muhammad's asking me, did you understand what he said? I said, I think so. He said, what did he say? I repeated. He said, yeah, that's what he said. And then Abdul Latif is just smiling. And then he says, did you see his eyes? And I said, yeah, I did. He said, you saw them? I said, yeah, I saw them. And that was the wada. That was Ustaz Mahmoud sending me off to Southern Sudan, which at the time was not the safest place for someone who looked like a Northerner to be traveling, to going to University of Juba and talking about Islam, right? It was kind of, if you think about it, maybe not the safest thing to do. But I never looked at it like that because, as I said, Ustaz was sending me, and it turned out to be a great experience for me. It was my only time traveling to Southern Sudan. And the Southerners embraced me at university. and also the home of Philip Obang, who was the husband of a colleague of mine who lived in Juba, had a home in Juba, home in Khartoum, north, I think. And I spent time, I had meals with him and that type of thing when I was there. So I want to stop there with this segment and open it up for questions, if there's any, or comments. I guess I should hit stop share. Maybe. I'm afraid to hit it. So I hit stop share to go back so we can see each other, or is this fine? You're muted, bro.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea to stop share if you are not sharing, so that.
Okay. Yeah. Tamam. Whoa, hello. So, yeah.
I have a question for you, Abdullah.
Yes, Omar.
So outside of your experiences at the university, at work, or with the Republicans, how was your experience in the streets of Sudan with ordinary people? Did that force you to speak in Arabic? And what was your impression about the Sudanese people?
Yeah, I did have an opportunity to speak with Sudanese people in the market, and while traveling, taking local transportation, and occasionally while doing transactions and so forth, I had an opportunity to speak in Arabic. So I interacted with Sudanese people on a pretty regular basis. Many of my conversations were in English because people would practice their English with me, but I did have an opportunity to speak in Arabic. And Sudanese people are exceptional. I mean, I'm not saying that because, I love you guys, I want to make you proud, but it's true. A good example. At our university, there was a custodian who worked in the School of Law. And he knew me as being an expatriate, foreign professor at the college. And we happened sometimes to arrive at Khartoum Market at the same time. We'd be coming to work at the same time in the morning. And he would pay for my ride, right, from the market to the school. And he did it every time, he saw me. And after a while, I felt I needed to repay him because I knew I made more than this guy, right? And he's paying for me every day. So my American training and morality is that I have to also reciprocate. I have to pay for him. And so one day I got there nice and early and I went over to the Kamsari on the back of the box and I paid for the two of us. And when the Kamsari then is collecting the money, he goes to pay for us both. And he says, "Oh no, you're already paid for." He said, "By whom?" I said, by this young man. He says, "By him?" He says, "Yes." He said, "He's a guest in our country." And the Kamsari is going, "Oh," and he says, "Are you Sudanese?" Yeah. He said, "Yes, I'm Sudanese." "Then you should know better. He cannot pay for me." He said, "I can pay for him. He can pay for himself, but he can't pay for me." That was his way. So he wouldn't accept it. He wouldn't accept me paying for him. He felt that I was the guest and it was his obligation to pay for me. So to me, that's Sudanese behavior, quintessential. It's unusual. That's not normal behavior around the world. I tell that story to people and everybody finds it to be exceptional behavior. And it's the Sudanese way. I say that Sudanese people, this is outside of the Jamhuri, right? Compete with each other to be generous. It's not normal. That's not the way most societies are structured. Some are, and you find elements of that probably in all societies, but it's common culture in Sudanese society that if you're going out to eat, somebody else tries to pay for you. That's something I picked up from the Sudanese. I introduced it to some of my professors here, and they started doing it, and they told me that they appreciate me telling them that because they feel better paying for other people than, say, having people come to their home and bring food. You can insult Sudanese folks if you come to their house and you bring food with you to eat at mealtime. That's an insult. How, you come to my house, I'm going to feed you. Even if my children don't eat, you're going to eat. I've been in a home and I stopped visiting this home because I found that they were feeding me and the girls in the house were not eating. They were eating the leftovers. And so I stopped visiting that home because I said, I can't take that, right? Maybe if it had been the boys, I could have taken it, but I couldn't take it. So I said, no, I just, we'll interact elsewhere, but I don't keep inviting me over to your house. I made up excuses and I stopped going. But so Sudanese behavior, and as an African-American, I was always treated well. I never had one, I had nobody who treated me poorly, Sudanese person, because I was African-American in 9 years. This is North or South, right? I didn't have that experience. And so I often say to people when they overgeneralize about Africa, they have to be careful, because it's easy to have an experience and then generalize it to an entire people or an entire continent. And it's just ridiculous. Africans generally are very generous and extremely hospitable, no matter where you find them, right? And African Americans, even in the South, retain some of that African culture themselves. Some of you living in the South will have seen that, all right? So, yeah, Sudanese, I think even amongst Africans, distinguish themselves. And I've had other people tell me that. When I was in Sudan, Sudan was identified a couple of times as the poorest country in Africa. A couple of times while I was there. Yet, every border had people coming into Sudan and the Sudanese were giving them refuge. Every border. They were coming from Chad, from Eritrea, from Ethiopia, from the Congo, from every border. They had people coming into Sudan and the Sudanese were being hospitable to them. It was a place of refuge for them. And they didn't have anything to give but their love and their generosity. And they gave it and it was enough. So I think that's my response to that question. But I think at the core of it, Omar, is what Ustaz says about the revival of Islam and Sudan, the way in which they're linked. For me, the way I understand it is the Sudanese are a cultured people, and they've particularly those along the Nile, but they're a cultured people, and that culture is ancient. It goes back not only to pre-dynastic Egypt, but before it. And the archaeologists are finding that now. Sudanese have been interacting with one another in a civilized, and by civilized, I mean a moral manner, as long as anybody on earth. That's my understanding of it. And the archaeological evidence is supporting that. So that will create behaviors that are unique over time if they're preserved. Thanks for the question. I'm right here. Just a second. Ask the question, but I'm not going anywhere.
Abdullah, I have a question for you. To what extent were you able to understand Al-Ustaz when he spoke in Arabic?
It's a hard question to answer, because to an extent that I shouldn't have been able to. So my general comprehension in Arabic, much better than my speaking and writing, of course. But I seem to understand Ustaz much more clearly than I understood everybody else. And how that happened, I'm not sure, but that's really true. And many times I would check my understanding and it would be basically correct. It wouldn't be precise, but it would be basically correct. So Ustaz had a way of speaking anyway that's kind of, I want to say, sophisticated but bellady at the same time. This was pointed out to me by some of my students. They were saying, he just speaks in a normal way. And then I started listening to him, even on the tapes, when you hear people introduce him, they're speaking in really a classical form, but that's not how Ustaz lectured. You know, he spoke in a way that's very accessible to the common person, right? To the average person. And so because of that, his language is more accessible to someone who doesn't have a huge vocabulary. The other thing is that Ustaz's language is very precise. He doesn't waste words. He gets right to the point. And that helps, you know, in terms of trying to follow the train of thought of someone when they're as precise as he is when he speaks. So I think that those two things, and then some inexplicable thing, is that I just tended to understand him, right? Better than I understood everybody else in Arabic. I mean, sometimes I would be in a situation, I'm overhearing people talk and I don't know what they're talking about. It's still the case. Other questions, comments, thoughts?
I have another question, Abdullah. Did Al-Ustaz ever ask you to translate for him? And how did you find his English command?
Translate for him? No, he never asked me to translate for him. Ustaz, his spoken English was flawless, like an Englishman, with a slightly English accent, right? It's flawless, it's spoken English. He did say to me one time that he feels he expresses himself more precisely in Arabic. And that's just, I think, by the nature of the Arabic language, that he expresses himself more precisely in Arabic. But no, never asked me to translate for him. And I never was in a situation where he seemed not to understand what was being said in English. But I was in situations where he would speak to a person and have, say, Dr. Abdullah translate what he said. But I don't think I would have been a good translator for him. I wouldn't have been precise enough. But Dr. Abdullah Ahmed Naim was a good translator of Ustaz Mahmoud. And I saw him being used, and maybe some other brothers, but he's the one that I remember that Ustaz had the capacity to speak. This was when the two yogis visited Ustaz Mahmoud, and they were asking him questions about Islam and trying to offer yoga as an alternative. And Ustaz went into some really deep conversations with them. And at first I was startled because he was conducting his responses in Arabic and having them translate by Dr. Abdullah, when he could have spoken to them in English, but he didn't. He spoke to them in Arabic and had them translated. So, and I think that's by virtue of Ustaz going through the educational system in Sudan and excelling from the time he is a small child all the way through Gordon College, which is now University of Khartoum, engineering, coming out of there with a degree in engineering. I mean, that system was a very I would say vertical system that the British developed. They didn't want too many people to be highly educated. It didn't suit their purposes. So they had very few opportunities for people beyond secondary school. And that was by intention. And so Stas excelled in that system. He mastered that system. And the system didn't master him. So what I mean is, one of the examples is when I was in Atbara and we were doing a woofed. We had brothers had gathered and we were going to do an intensive hamla in Atbara, city along the derivative of the Nile in northern Sudan. And it's a very working class town. It's a hub for the trains and so forth. And so I had my books in English and I didn't find too many English speaking people. So I'm looking for them, right? And I go into a store and there's a guy in his jalabia behind the store and he's the proprietor. And he says, "Oh, those are the books of Mahmoud Muhammad Taha?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Oh, I don't buy into Stas' understanding of Islam." I said, "Oh, you don't?" I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, I just don't." He said, "But as a man," he said, "I buy into it." I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "I went to school with him." And he told me this story. It must have been in Rufa or Hasahisa. I don't know which. But he's in school with Ustaz and they have an English teacher. And he's very typically arrogant teacher who's making the students feel like he's doing them a favor by even teaching them, right? He's Lord somebody. And he's making the boys feel really uncomfortable. They're uncertain of themselves and he's constantly belittling them. And so he has just belittled one of the students and Ustaz goes up to him and he's consoling the student. Ustaz is very young. I don't know his age, but he's very young. I'm talking grade school, right? And he's consoling this student. And the teacher says to him, "Mahmoud, don't think I don't have my eye on you. I read you like a book, young man." And Ustaz says to this teacher, this tyrant of a teacher, when he's a child, he says to him, "But sir, you don't seem to understand a word of the book you're reading." He said that he became the hero of the class. The boys lost their fear of this teacher, right? I don't know how old Stas was, but our classmate has kind of put him in his place, right? So, yeah. Stas mastered English. He mastered that system, but he didn't allow the system to master him. And this is a thing he pointed out many times, at least to me, when he was talking about, say, Hassan Tarabi, that experience I had with him. And I concluded that Dr. Tarabi, because he had spent the entire lunch criticizing Ustaz Mahmoud, and when I asked him for an example where he violated the Quran, he couldn't come up with one. And he said, the only example that comes to mind is one that I happen to agree with. So when I reported back to Ustaz my lunch with Dr. Tarabi and that final statement that he made, when I asked him the question, Ustaz said, "Well, what did you think?" I said, "I think that he's a hypocrite." Ustaz was saying, no, there's a contradiction between Dr. Tarabi's Western education and his understanding of Islam. And what you experienced was that contradiction. We don't have to conclude that he was a hypocrite. That was his response. But what Ustaz did not have, he went through the same Western education, right? Because that's what that was, particularly when you're at Gordon College, named after that general, Gordon, right? You should come out of there with a certain type of socialization. Ustaz came out of there with his own mind and with his own perceptions on the world. And he didn't buy into the idea that the British were the masters on high. And he told them as much. And then as soon as he formed his political party, he was in opposition to the British. And he would not sign an agreement to say he wouldn't oppose him. That's what leads him to jail. And that's why I want to say Ustaz Mahmoud spoke English, mastered English, but English did not master him. He had his own mind. And that's hard to do because the colonial powers, part of what they had to do in order to rule a large population was rule their minds. That way the people will govern themselves in ways that are in the interest of the colonial master. So they had to have a certain segment of people that were highly educated, but they had to be socialized so that they would buy into the system, you see. Most of the intellectuals at the time were buying into the idea that they needed either the English or the Egyptians to rule Sudan. That was abhorrent to Ustaz Mahmoud. Why can't we rule ourselves? Right. So I went on. Thanks for the question.
You're welcome, Abdullah.
I see a hand up.
Yeah, there is a hand up and there is a question also.
Okay. You might. Okay.
There's a question from the YouTube.
Okay.
Mabet 249, has it been difficult to maintain the Jamhuri lifestyle after coming back to the US?
Yes. Yes, it has. And I wouldn't have been able to do it unless there was, to the degree that I have, unless there was community that I was still in contact with in some form or fashion, whether they be in Calgary or California or Iowa or Fort Worth or Ohio or wherever they are. It's very important for us to reinforce each other's practices. And so, yeah, I found it tremendously difficult. Part because I was mourning when I came back and I didn't realize it. So I was going through my own psychological processes that I hadn't really dealt with the execution of Ustaz Mahmoud. And just, not having people around me that were getting up in the morning and praying. That I got diabetes. I stopped fasting. That made it really difficult when I stopped fasting. Yeah, so it's difficult when you are detached from a community that reinforces your practice. And the issue that I have is I tried to go to some mosques, right? And honestly, I can't take it. I can't go and listen to people saying things that I don't believe in. And saying things that I think are even harmful to people. I can't keep my mouth closed. And so I know that I've told stories. I've been invited to speak at mosques, and then I kind of told people what I was going to be talking about, and they disinvited me. And I had some experiences going into mosques and people wanting to be violent because I was trying to explain to them that there's different possible interpretations of Islam. Some of them are novel. They're not popular. But what is popular with Islam right now is it is not a governing force in this world right now. It's not a major player in the world. And the only way that people have promoted is the name of Islam in any way is to create havoc violently. And that is the antithesis of Islam. Islam means peace for a reason. It's not a banner for warfare. That's why it's called Islam. And so the notion of engaging in jihad before with others before you engage in it with yourself is something people need to really work on, because you're going to be held accountable for this understanding. You can't say Sheikh so-and-so told me this. You have a brain. You better think about what the Sheikh is saying, because if you think that's going to keep the fire off of you, that Sheikh so-and-so said so, made a fatwa, then that's a joke. You know, you're going to be judged by your capacity, what you knew, and how you acted in accordance with it, period. We're responsible for our behaviors. And so that's my issue, and that's everybody else's issue. But yeah, it's difficult. It was much easier to be in Alif, in Haraka, with everybody else getting up in the middle of the night competing to pray the night prayer. You had to look for a corner sometimes of where to pray at 3 a.m. Yeah, and then going off to work, working full-time job, part-time job, and then going to Haraka, you know, until 10 at night. That was 6 days a week. So of course that type of movement puts you in a certain type of frame of mind, and it reinforces particular types of positive, healthy behaviors. And when you don't have it, you have to be a very strong person to keep yourself on Tariq Muhammad. Thanks for the question. That's why we need community. We need Islamic community. It's critically important. Yes.
There is no more questions. So
I see a hand right. Oh no, that's my own hand. All right.
Yeah.
Wait. Okay.
So
I
I'll
think
give you a word a chance to conclude. Then Omar will play Nanzan now.
Okay. Now I just want to again, thanks for the opportunity, folks, and for listening. I hope you got something out of what was said. Apologize if you didn't. Come back. Promise to try to do better next time. We will do another one. There's at least 4. You also have the opportunity to listen to Ahmed Dali, who's tremendously informed, and he's speaking on a regular basis. So please do that. And I want to just, special thanks to you, Omar, Abdul Hajj, Ishmael, everybody else, and Ashari for encouraging me to do this. I do appreciate it, brother. It's good for my soul. It's good for my mind, my heart, my body. It's good for me to be engaged in trying to pull together my ideas. Some of you don't know this, but I'm planning on writing this book that's been in the works for a while. And this process is part of that. So thank you all for helping by being present. Allah hafazkum wa shukran.
Abdullah, thank you so much for the outstanding presentation. And as you know, I'm pushing you with my both hands to finish the book. And I really look forward to reading that book. This presentation is the second episode, and next month we'll have the third part. Thank you all, and Umar, please play Inna Anzalnahu. Shukran lakum jami'an.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إنا أنزلناه في ليلة القدر وما أدراك ما ليلة القدر. ليلة القدر خير من 1000 شهر. تنزل الملائكة والروح فيها بإذن ربهم من كل أمر. سلام هي حتى مطلع الفجر. صدق الله العظيم.